Steve's going to let us know about PH. You guys probably got the email. He had an incredible accident the other day. So tell us.
Yeah, my wife had taken PH to the VA for his vision. He needed some new glasses, and after he'd seen the doctor, they'd gone and were meeting with one of the people that was going to help him order what he needed. And when he was ready to leave, they started to go out the way they'd come in. And she said, "Where'd you park?" And they said, "Oh, we parked over in the front." She said, "Well, you just turn it. You go out this way." So as he tried to turn 180 degrees, he fell, and he hit his head on her desk, and and then landed on the floor, and was kind of trapped there. My wife, who teaches emergency response teams, immediately went into action. He had a head wound that was bleeding, and she had to apply a lot of pressure. And, she kept apologizing to him. "I know this hurts, but I've got to stop the bleeding. You're on blood thinners." And so he was bleeding in a couple of places, and they had 911, and they had the emergency team come, and he didn't want to be taken to the hospital. He wanted to be taken home. So my wife took him home. And as he got home, the pain worsened. And then she said, "We're calling 911 and going to the emergency room." So they were Monday night and Tuesday morning all night. They were at the emergency room, and she had to work. The staff there was not very good about doing what they needed to do. They wanted to scan one side of him, wasn't even the side that he needed to be scanned. So she had to kind of take charge. But so he was in ICU through yesterday, and I'd seen him yesterday, and he's in pretty good spirits when he's on painkillers. First of all, as soon as they got fentanyl in him, he was much better. But they've been using just a regular a Tylenol drip, I think. And he yesterday he called and said that he sat up for the first time. They moved him to his own room out of ICU yesterday. So this morning he's called. There's a few things he needs, but he's in pretty good spirits. But he's got 3 broken ribs, and so it looks like most of the other things that were first they were worried he might have a fracture in his neck, but they determined that was an older issue that. So anyway, so he's. I got his permission before I did an email to everybody. I got his permission. It was okay to send it out, but he's in pretty good spirits. I'm going to go see him when I leave here. I got to go pick up a few things at his house for him, and so I'll be sure and tell him that I saw you guys and was able to share with you about it. So that's it.
Thank you. Well, we know all too well at age levels that most of us are at or approximating, that there's no such thing as a minor injury or a minor surgery. That's what somebody else has, right? So continue to pray for PH, pray for John as he recovers from COVID. And let me just include those as we open in prayer. Also, invite your feedback. We are still testing out our new PA system, which is great. Thanks in part to PH and his generosity and some of you others. So we welcome your feedback. You should be able to hear it very well.
What a lot of people need to understand, however, is that 16, 17.
Let me mute Baron for the first time. And again, we can all think of strategic people and even angels, angelic in form, that were there when we needed them. So that was one of those miracles of providence, we call them. All right, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for a good report coming out of a bad report, where you are on the scene, always working on behalf of your children. We lift up PH to you and ask that you would comfort him, heal him, bring him back to us soon, overcome all the obstacles that may be in his path before he has that freedom to join back into life again. We are also praying for John and recovering his wife from COVID. And we thank you for the angelic forces, human or otherwise, that are there to assist, like Steve's wife. We think of other people who are not here, maybe because of limitation or illness. We think of Don Marbury and others. we miss greatly, but we understand their circumstances. It's our demographic. We are those who are aging and finding ailments becoming more of a problem. So would you continue to do your great physician work, the things that only you can do? We have great doctors in this area, but only you can heal. So we avail ourselves to that and ask that you would do that in a mighty way. And all those members of this group, past and present, would feel some kind of a supernatural touch, even as we begin this part of our meeting now. Thank you for all the discussion around the table, the food we've consumed. And now maybe this spiritual meal would all combine to make it a great day for you. May you smile by what we do here today. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I have a very simple, very basic question to ask us today. One that is just so easy, we can probably answer it in just a few minutes and then we can all go home. A very simple question, of course. The dynamic of this question, if I can get it to come up. Let me mute Baron again. There we go. Here's our question for the day. That's pretty general, isn't it? Pretty small. We can handle that in one session. What is faith? You may wonder why we would even talk about it in a group like this, because we are men of faith. We have believed, we have trusted, we have given our lives to various things over the years. Why would we even want to talk about that? Well, maybe you can refine a little bit of what your faith is by this afternoon's talk. But I'm thinking more specifically about the people you and I know that don't possess what we would call a biblical or a Christian faith. How would you explain that to them? A lot of people like to say, well, I'm spiritual. What does that mean today? Not a whole lot. It means I enjoy observing a sunset with a margarita in my hand. That's very spiritual. Or I enjoy just the exercise in the yoga class or the whatever Middle Eastern religion they've contemplated or philosophy. What is faith? You know, there's a lot of people that I talk to that would say this: I don't have faith. I live by facts. I'm a fact person. Don't give me this faith business, this mythological believism. I want something concrete. I want to believe based on facts, not on faith. Well, I would always submit to a person like that, you are created with a faith basis. We all operate by faith in some way. And that usually gets a very stern look. Oh, no. I'm a fact person. Science is my God. I go by that. Well, generally, it's good to have a few illustrations at that point to disavow them of that belief. My favorite one is to talk about cars, because most everybody has a car. And this group may be the exception, but most groups I talk to, when I ask them this, I say, does anybody here fully understand the dynamics of internal combustion machinery? Let me see a show of hands. Joe, you do? All right, Joe, would you come up here now? Do you understand how that machine works and when it goes bad? I had a really serious problem. I was leaving this Bible study a week ago, and I got near the interstate, and the transmission began going crazy. It was downshifting very erratically. It felt like I was going over potholes that weren't in the road. I get on the interstate. I look at my tachometer, and it was over 5,000 RPMs. It was stuck in a low gear. It wasn't shifting right. Took it into the mechanic, and he basically said, we can't reproduce that. And it had not done it since, like for days. He said, but we did ask for, and I permitted them to take the transmission fluid out, flush it out, and refill it. And they said it looked burnt. I don't know what that means either, but it didn't look good. They said, you tow anything? I said, well, I do tow a boat, but it's not that heavy. He said, well, you should probably have this transmission fluid exchanged sooner than the recommended 30,000 miles. Every 25 would be fine. But when that is going on, I'm thinking, I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand what makes the motor even run. I mean, I've been told that many times, and yet you do the same thing, not understanding fully how it works. You take a little sliver of metal and inject it into a little collar of metal, give it a little twitch, fully believing it's going to turn on. You don't even think about it most times you get in your car. It's just automatic. You don't understand it, but you live by the faith that that car is going to safely navigate you to your destination. And what is more, you're going to pass cars on the way coming to this building, right? And you will probably, like me, pass on a road that doesn't have a barricade between the oncoming traffic. Some interstates are divided, but I come the back ways here through Farrington Road over Jordan Lake and all those areas. And I'm passing, I don't know how many cars in a 30-minute drive over here, but I don't take the time to interview them and the morning before and say, how was your sleep last night? Are you drowsy? Have you had any alcohol last night? Are you hungover? Do you have any this morning? Are you on fentanyl? If you got anything going coursing through your veins? I don't interview the drivers. I don't know the drivers who are coming toward me. And the only thing physically separating me from a head-on collision and that driver is paint on the road, which, as to my knowledge, would not stop a careening vehicle coming into my truck, right? I operate every time I drive my car on the basis of faith. It doesn't feel like faith because it's just redundant stuff that I've done since I was a teenager. Let me give you another one. How many of you understand elevators? Gene, you work on them? Well, then you don't. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express one time. I'm always amazed whenever they build a new structure. I'm watching some around the Holly Springs Fuquay Arena area. The very first thing they build is the big cinder block chamber that'll house the elevator. That's the first thing, because there's so many technical things that have to go right for that to be in service later. I mean, there's pulleys, there's counterweights, there's hydraulics. And yet, when that thing is built, if you go to a building today and you come up to the door, what do you do by faith? You push a button, fully expecting that that thing will soon get to where you are and soon take you to where you want to be. I submit to you, that's an element of faith. Have you ever been on an elevator that didn't make it? They got stuck between floors? You suddenly realize it isn't a done deal. It's a matter of faith. But still, there are people who are very much into science, and they say all those are kind of mechanical things, cars, elevators. But we're talking about science now. I'm really a science fan. I don't believe in anything unless it can be proven in a laboratory under repeatable, controlled experimentation, yielding consistent results. I just gave you a layman's definition of what's called the scientific theory. If you can take water and you can subject it to electrolysis, I think is the process, somebody will have to correct me, it will produce consistently 2 parts hydrogen, Baron, I'm going to mute you for the last time. There you go. 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, otherwise known as H2O, correct? You can do that over and over again. That establishes the theory, the fact, I guess you can call it a fact, that is the composition of water. So to the scientific mind, I don't believe anything unless we can do that. We can do it in repeatable, controlled experimentation. I was giving a talk on heaven one time at a Rotary, Kiwanis Club or something over here in Chapel Hill many years ago. I was warned that there was a skeptic in the room, be careful. And before I even got finished, he raised his hand. He said, "You've been talking a lot about heaven today. Can you prove the existence of heaven?" And I'm smart enough in my old age to say, before I give an answer, the question, well, what would prove that to you? Make sure you're in the same area of proof before you go any further. And he said, I want scientific proof of the existence of heaven. And I said, well, I cannot give that to you because science is really good at describing and analyzing and diagnosing the natural world. It is very poor, if not totally incapable of describing the supernatural world. Is there some other kind of proof that would satisfy? And he surprised me. He said, yes. Anecdotal, meaning has someone been there and come back to tell about it? I said, I think I can help you with that. And I wanted to talk about Jesus, but he wasn't happy about that. So I said, we have a member of our group, PH, who said he's been there and come back. So we'll get you two together and you guys can talk about it. Scientific theory, does that always make a consistent analysis and projection of truth? No, of course it doesn't, because we've seen many times certain long-held ideas are suddenly debunked by further science. There was a time, we were not around at that time, when everybody thought the earth was the center of our system of planets and stars all went around us, geocentric universe. And then a guy came along by the name of Copernicus. Galileo was close, but Copernicus was the guy that said, what if we put the sun, our closest star, in the middle, had the planets revolving around that and the associated moons? That would explain what you see in the night sky. They thought he was crazy, but he was right. And things change over the time. I don't think science is necessarily always exact. It's fluid in many cases. And so I would submit again that people who say they believe in science have a faith in the scientific method. They can't prove that the scientific method is always right. So what is faith? We have two stories in the Bible this afternoon that I want to use to illustrate what I think is biblical faith, both in the sense of salvation, but also in the day-to-day faith that you and I have to exhibit in our challenges every day. This is found in Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 40. You know these two stories. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him. Duh, he's always crowded. For they were all waiting for him, and there was a man named Jairus. Notice his pedigree. He was a ruler of the synagogue, a strong leader of the local assembly of Jews. But he did something very unusual. He fell at Jesus' feet. You didn't do that if you're the leader of the synagogue, but he did. He implored Jesus to come to his house, for he had an only daughter about 12 years of age. She was dying. We're going to find out she was very close to death, in a matter of minutes, if not an hour. So that's the first challenge of faith. Jesus, as we see, begins to go with him. It says the next verse, as Jesus went, meaning he on the way to Jairus' house, there's an interruption by another request of faith, not even a verbal request. The people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, gynecological problem. It says that she had spent all of her living on physicians, but could not be healed by anyone. This is Luke's account. Luke is what by profession? A physician. He simply says they could not heal her. Mark's parallel account, if you read it, says not only could they not heal her, they made her worse. That's what Luke would conveniently omit. She came up from behind Jesus and she touched the fringe of his garment. She had some idea that the proximity to the men of faith, coupled with her faith, would equal the miracle she desired. And immediately, it says, the discharge of blood ceased. She would have known that. She would have sensed that in her body. Now, what is wrong with this picture? She has a discharge of blood. It's known. This is not something that just happened yesterday. It's a dozen so years this has been going on. Have you noticed also, it's the same amount of time of the life of the daughter that Jairus is trying to heal. That would have made her ceremonially unclean to be associated with blood. She was not supposed to be in a crowd. If she got near people like a leper, she was to yell and shout, unclean. So she comes incognito, probably dressed differently, to sneak in there to get the miracle her faith required. Now, Jairus is waiting for Jesus to depart and go to his house, but Jesus interrupts that scene and says, who was it that touched me? Now, imagine you're one of Jesus's followers, one of his apostles. The crowd is all touching him. And all the people said, oh, not me, not me, not me. They all denied it. And Peter sort of added this little point. By the way, don't ever say this to Jesus. Master, the crowd surrounds you and are all pressing in on you. Master of the obvious. Thank you so much, Peter. Like Jesus, what a stupid question. But Jesus said, no, no, no. Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me. That's a beautiful image, by the way, that when God exercises that supernatural surge, he feels it. He knows it. It's directive. It's personal. So having said that, the woman saw that she was not hidden, and she came trembling, as you and I would be. We've been found out. She doesn't know what this little encounter is going to mean now. And falling down before him, what did Jairus do? Fell down before him. Declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. I don't know how long this took. when someone asks me how I'm doing and I've got an ailment, I can give you that in about 10 seconds. You ask my wife how she's doing, that could take 30 minutes. And I'm thinking of Jairus at this point. He's tapping his foot. Woman, could you tell your story? Could we get on to my house? I don't know how long she took. It just says she told everybody and that she was healed. And after that, Jesus said to her, daughter, which, by the way, whenever Jesus says that in the New Testament, that's a term of endearment. Daughter, your faith has made you well. That's a bigger word than healed. That's spirit, soul, and body. So now go in shalom, go in peace, a wholeness. Beautiful story, only there's a guy over here tapping his foot. Jairus, while Jesus was still speaking, they're about to do a 180 and now head toward his house. But before they can even do that, there's a party of people coming out from Jairus's house. It says, someone from the ruler's house came and said, it's too late. Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. What are you thinking, Jairus? If he hadn't taken a moment with this woman, we might be seeing my daughter well. At the very least, he's thinking, we missed my chance. But the beautiful thing about this is when I doubt, when my faith wavers, Jesus knows. And he knows what to give me in that moment to keep me going in an area of faith. Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, do not fear. Fear is the opposite of faith. I'm afraid God's not going to come through. So he says, do not fear, only believe, only continue with faith, and she will be, future tense, she will be well. Now, the guy's just freshly told them that she's dead. And he says she will be well. Give Jairus credit, because this is not making sense. If he's going on, quote, fact, report, scientific evidence, they put a mirror up to her nose, there's no breath forming on the mirror. So they continue, and they came to the house. Now, what's going on at the house? It goes on to this very day. When a prominent Jewish person has a death in the family, people mourn. But if they're prominent enough and well-respected enough, the professional mourners show up. What do I mean by that? I've actually seen this on a trip to Israel. I heard it more than I saw it. They come to weep and to wail, put on sackcloth, throw ashes in the air, and the more they do that demonstratively and loudly, then the more grief and respect they're giving to the deceased. And if you're the ruler of the synagogue, you got that. That's coming. Man, they got there quick, didn't they? I don't know how long it took them to get there, but they're already into their mourning and wailing and grieving. Notice that they can flip a switch here in a minute. They can go from that to laughter in just a heartbeat. They get there. Jesus said, okay, no one's allowed to enter this room with the daughter except Peter, John, James, Jairus the father, and the mother, along with Jesus. So that's 6 people going to go in this room with the daughter. Why only 6 people? These may be the only people in the room with faith. They had demonstrated. They're probably going to show it as we get into that moment. We don't want the mourners and the wailers and the guys that gave the report in that room. They don't have faith. They were all weeping and mourning for her, but he said to them to shut them down a little bit. He said, do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping. In the way Jesus looks at life, physical death can only be sleeping, temporary. Now they flip the switch, these professional mourners do, and they go from weeping and wailing. They laughed at him. What a quick switch. Why'd they laugh? Knowing their facts that she was dead. That's what they were believing. She's dead. So watch what Jesus does. He takes the woman, the little daughter, by the hand. Again, a term of endearment. And he called her child, 12-year-old child, arise or get up. I hope there's video replay in heaven of this one. I really want to see this moment. I want to see the expressions on Jairus' face and mom's face, because it says her spirit returned. It hadn't gotten very far. And she did get up, not just in an hour or two. It says she got up when? At once. And he directed that something should be given to her to eat. I love that about Jesus. I think right after I die, he's going to offer me something to eat. And her parents, though they had faith, were still amazed. Faith, when operated and rewarded, is amazing. We often recount some of the great things we've seen in our life, and we should never lose the amazement of when God does what only God can do. And then there's this last ending of the story. He turns to the people in the room, primarily the parents and the girl. We've added a person to the room now. She's back alive. Hey, listen, this has been great. I've enjoyed my time here. It's good to see you back alive again. But he charged them to tell no one what had happened. Like she missed school today, excused absence because she was dying and dead. She's showing up tomorrow with a note saying, Jesus healed me. Can I come back to school? Don't tell anybody. Of course, we know that Jesus told a lot of people after a miracle, don't tell anybody, for his time had not yet come. He was putting off the encounter with the Pharisees as much as he could. And that's only the reason he said that. Now, we know that they told people. But how many more would they have told him if he hadn't told them not to? Two incredible stories of faith. What do we learn about faith in general? What is this thing called faith? How do we keep the faith? How do we exercise faith? It's all been demonstrated in this simple story in Luke chapter 8. I think there's some ingredients here. I don't like recipe theology, but I think I see three things here that you and I will say once we talk at them, yeah, that is what my faith is when it's in full operation. Faith begins with some claim of data or facts. And in this case, they knew of Jesus. They'd heard reports of him. And I put facts up there, but really should be data because I define facts as something that may or may not be true, right? Somebody may claim that Jesus is coming back tonight. Well, that's a claim. It may or may not be true. If I put my faith in that, I might act a totally different way than someone who thinks it's going to be 10 years from now. Data. What Sergeant Friday would ask for when he'd go on the scene to do an investigation and the witness would go on and on. He would pause them for a moment and say, what would he say? Just the facts, man. Just the facts. So in the case of salvation, it'd be a fact like God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have life everlasting, right? That's fact. Do we believe that or not? It starts with a claim. It starts with data. It starts with a fact. But then it proceeds to a second level of assent. And assent is simply when you have intellectual assent that that fact you're basing your faith on is actually true. Like, did Jesus really live? Did Jesus really die? Did he really go to the cross? So you can have a lot of facts or claims and not believe that they're true. You ever pick up a newspaper or watch the 6 o'clock news or worse, the 7 o'clock news? 6:30 news? There are a lot of so-called journalists, not like Elliot, but those who got a degree in journalism and then hung that up a long time ago, and they're giving a lot of data, but aren't necessarily true. But when you get to the point where you say, I've investigated that fact, I think it's reliable, it's based on all that I've examined, it is true, I will assent to that and say in my own belief system, that is true. Is that faith? Have you reached the final level of faith at that point? Well, let's test that. Jesus had something to say about that. His half-brother James had something to say about that. And they made it clear that you can get to level 2 in this faith recipe and fail because there are certain people called demons who do have really good intellectual assent. They have full-blown theology of who Jesus was at the time, but I don't think they're getting to heaven on the basis of what they believe. Remember what James said? He grew up in the household with Jesus. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and are going to heaven. No. They believe and they're going to really see miracles happen in their life. No. What is the end result of their intellectual assent? They are scared to death. They shudder. And of course, Jesus encountered that madman of Gadara who was possessed by how many demons? Legion. Thousands, perhaps. Jesus would ultimately kick him out of that guy and put him into the herd of pigs, and they all went over the cliff, and died in the water, first case of deviled ham. That was a horrible, horrible moment. But what did the demons speak and say out of Jesus before that moment? What have you, Jesus, to do with me? Notice the theology. You're the Son of the Most High God. I beg you, do not torment me. Another translation said, before the time. Before humans fully understood who Jesus was, the demons fully understood, and they assented to it. He's the Son of the Most High. He can torment us. There's a time coming when he'll sequester us in a place called the abyss. Has that time already arrived? They're worried about. That's pretty good theology. Did they have faith? I submit they didn't, because they lacked the third and most important ingredient. When you have the facts and you assent and believe that they're true, the third and final thing is a simple word: trust. It's the personal reliance, and that key word there's personal reliance in those facts that you do believe are true. The simple illustration of that is you walked in this room today, you saw the same chairs that Amity provides for us for this meal, and you didn't think about it. You trusted that that chair would hold you up when you sat down on it. Now, had you walked into the fellowship hall and the first thought you had was, Donnie is a trickster, and Donnie has gone to some prop department and had them build a fake chair made of balsa wood, that won't hold you up, but they painted it. They made it look exactly like that. And one of these chairs is the fake chair. And I better be careful if I sit down on it. What would you do if you had that fear? You would take that chair, you'd move it around, you'd squeeze it, might put a little weight on that before you put your full weight on that. Because you don't have faith in all the chairs until you find the one you're sitting in is not the fake chair. I tried to illustrate this in a sermon one time. I found a stool like you have here one time, and I bought two identical ones from a cheap store, and I told this carpenter, take the one and cut it in places that won't be seen, so that when I illustrate this, I'm going to take that one and I'm just going to tap it on the floor, and it's going to fall apart to illustrate the bad chair. And we had like 2 services, so I had to buy like 6 chairs. The rascal put one little tiny cut in it. And so when I went to just do this, nothing happened. I had to beat the daylights out of that to get the legs to fall apart, ruin my whole serve. But you understand trust. All these issues of getting in an elevator, starting a car, you put issues of trust in play when you do what you do that's otherwise called faith, right? Trust. That's the key element. If you ever have the conversation about faith, you've got to get to the element of trust. And I know I've used this illustration before, but there's no better illustration of what trust looks like than the famous true story of the amazing Blondin. You remember the story? He was a European tightrope walker. He had done his act in Europe all over from the 1820s, I think, to the 1850s, and then decided, let's go to North America. So he comes to the Niagara Falls area, somehow got permission, I don't know how, I probably paid some money, and strung a tightrope 1,100 feet across from the Canadian side to the American side, I think just above the Horseshoe Falls, 160 feet above the water, no tether, no net, no security. And he began to walk back and forth. This is actually the headline from the Akron Beacon Journal in September of 1860, when it all began. Niagara Falls attracts a lot of people, and now the crowds are swelling and growing and growing. And he did everything. He didn't just walk across there. He put a table out there and ate lunch, balancing with that balancing beam. He stood on his head. Here's the actual promotional poster. He carries a stove out there. He balances sitting down. He's doing all kinds of somersaults on that thing, wooing the crowd. They're amazed at his amazing ability. And to try to one-up his act every now and then, he'd add something. So on this particular day, where they had built an observation deck, I think it was actually a bridge that paralleled the tightrope. You'll see it in the picture. He shows up with this. It was something that looks like a wheelbarrow. It had a grooved hub so it would fit on the wire, not a real tire. But it also had the balancing bar on it and a little place for someone to sit. And he wheels it over there. You see the observation deck in the background? After he'd gone over there a couple times without anybody in it, he yells over to the crowd. Now that you've seen what I've been doing for weeks, and now that you've seen what I'm doing here today, how many of you believe that I can put a person in this wheelbarrow and safely take them to the other side? Every hand went up. Everybody cheered like they really want to see it. We believe, Blondin, you can do anything. This is amazing. We know you can do that. So he saw the most enthusiastic person on the front row. Let's say it's Peter. He said, all right, Peter, why don't you join me here at the edge of the rope and get in the wheelbarrow, and you'll be the one I'll take to the other side. They are still looking for Peter. He left in a hurry. He tried to get other volunteers, went on for 20, 30 minutes, could not get a single volunteer of the crowd that had the facts, had the mental assent, just didn't have the trust. And the end of the story is no one would volunteer. Here's the actual picture of him grabbing his manager who had to comply. And instead of the wheelbarrow, which he jettisoned, he carried him over piggyback. Now, to me, that's more scary than going in the wheelbarrow. So what is the point here? You can say, I believe. But until you get in the wheelbarrow, you really don't have this thing called faith. There's another way faith is described. We've used it here in this room. The 5 letters of faith, F-A-I-T-H. When it comes to salvation, we say, forsaking all other options of messiahs, I trust him. Forsaking all, I trust God. I don't trust the science. I don't trust the other things as much as I trust the Heavenly Father. Sometimes faith is exclusive. Many times faith is narrow because it's choosing between 2 options, opposing options. But really, I like the image of the wheelbarrow. I have one at home. I was going to bring it today and have each of you take a turn in there and see if you trust me to wheel you around this room, but that seemed to be cumbersome. What is faith? The question is, are you getting in the wheelbarrow? Are you still in the wheelbarrow? See, some people will get in there when it comes to salvation. Yeah, I trust him for that. But my day-to-day living, my marriage, my finances, my parenting, those other things, I don't know that I really fully trust him that much. But I do trust him to get me to heaven. Faith is getting in the wheelbarrow, right? But it's a scary place to be. And maybe you're like this guy. I know that's the right thing to do, Steve, but I'm not sure I like that. Every now and then, God allows me to meet somebody that evidences faith. It just adds to my understanding and my appreciation and my practice of faith. And the story I've told you before, I will tell you again that it's one of my favorites. So I like to hear it, so I'm going to tell it. This is my second church is in the 80s. It's a Thursday afternoon, Donnie. You're kind of winding down the afternoon. The phone rings. You're thinking, oh, I got one more thing. One parishioner's calling me. And on the other end of the phone was a guy named by the Muncie Morton. Never forget that name. He was married to Inez. He's a retired welder in Greensboro, lived in a little old place not far from the church. Gruff old guy. I mean, he would come to church and sit about where Stephen is with his wife, Inez. Now, Inez would open the hymnal and belt out those hymns of the faith like she wrote them. And Inez would sit there stone-faced. Never sang. Looked like he didn't want to be there. And I've told you before, I thought he had a drug problem. His wife drug him to church every week. So to my amazement, he was on the other end of the phone and had kind of this gruff voice, said something like, preacher, get on over here to the house. I need you to pray about something. So I got in my Toyota and headed on over there and pulled in. I said, Muncie, what's going on? He said, well, I done been to the heart doctor. And he says, I got a bad valve in my heart. And they say they can take my bad valve out and they can put this here pig valve in my heart. And I live to tell about it. Now, in the 1980s, that was pretty sketchy at Moses Cone Hospital in Greensboro. So we had a good season of prayer, me and Inez and Muncie in that front room of their house, and I'm all done. I'm getting up to go. He grabs my hand before I could get out the door. He says, "Preacher, ain't going to be doing the surgery till mid-morning. Come on by the hospital, pray one more time. It couldn't hurt." So I said, sure. And Stephen will tell you, and Donnie will tell you, when you go to the hospitals in the morning, it's busy. That's a busy time. I was expecting it to be noisy, but I go down the corridor there at Moses Cone Hospital, and it kind of looked like this. There was like nothing going on. I think God had set this up for me, because as I got closer to his room, his was the last room down on the left. I heard something that shocked me. I heard, "Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord, my Father." And he starts singing, "Great is thy faithfulness." Now, I began to suspect he had a shot of Demerol already, which I would find later to be true. But I got to the door, and he's belting it out bigger than Inez. And I didn't want to interrupt that, because that was expression of faith he needed to give before major surgery. But he saw my little head peeking around the window from time to time. He said, "Oh, preacher, come on in." That's when I knew he'd had the shot of Demerol. He was never that nice. I said, "Muncie, I did not want to interrupt that singing. You're facing life-threatening surgery, and you're singing of your faith and God's faith combining in a great moment. How can you do that?" I'm a young preacher. I needed to hear the answer. And I'll never forget what he said. He looked at me rather condescendingly and said, "Preacher, way I got it figured, I can't lose." And let that linger for a minute. I said, "The way I got it figured, if I go on in there and I die, I just get to see Jesus before you do. But if they put this here pig valve in my heart and I live to tell about it, I just got that many more years to torment Inez." So, the surgery went great, or I wouldn't be telling you the story. And weeks go by before he's able enough to come to church. And when he did, we all gathered around him after the service and loved on him like you do in your churches. When it came my turn to walk up to him, I said, "Muncie, how's that pig valve working out in your heart?" I think he was ready for the answer, because he didn't miss a beat. He looked right at me. He says, "Well, I can't tell no difference, except every now and then I go by a barbecue place. I just start crying. I don't even know why." If I want to really express faith, a lot of times I just use his words. I can't lose. I can't lose. God is worthy of my trust. He'll take me in that faith wheelbarrow safely to the other side, whatever the adversity, whatever the challenge is. So if you ever want to talk about faith, if you ever want to explore it for yourself, it's a simple question. Have you gotten into the wheelbarrow after you've applauded and said, "Jesus, I know you can do it"? And are you still in the wheelbarrow? If you were on the tightrope going to the other side, you wouldn't have an option. You don't want to jump out. But we have options today. We can sort of believe and get out of it, sort of believe and get out of it. That's my final comment and question to you. Have you gotten into the wheelbarrow? To me, gentlemen, that is faith. Let's pray. Father, we are people who need to stay consistently inside the confines of the faith wheelbarrow. We don't like it sometimes because we see other options. We think we know better, or perhaps we don't really believe what you're saying is true. But for those of us who've examined and looked at all the options and found you to be the only one that's trustworthy, gotten in that wheelbarrow, and we want to stay there. Help us to be those kind of men and women that do that. And we certainly know people in our families, in our streets, in our businesses that continue to avoid it. Man, they're jumping in all kinds of other wheelbarrows and trying to ride them out when they fail miserably. They go all the way into the water or down the falls. But we find you to be trustworthy. May we be the ones to encourage them to find that faith, to examine the data, to believe it's true, and to put their trust in Jesus. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about how you understand faith, Maybe a great story like Muncie and Inez, where you've seen it on display. What are your thoughts? Let's hear from you now. Yeah.
A distant cousin of mine, Reverend Dr. Bill Jones, pastored a huge Baptist church in Brooklyn, New York. And it was asked of him once, what is faith? He said, it's simple. Faith is simply this. Yes, God. Now, what's the question?
Sign the check and let God fill it in. I like that. Well done, Donnie. Thank you. Other thoughts this morning, afternoon?
Steve, it's really interesting because my Bible study this morning at 7 discussed this same story. And so it was still kind of percolating. One of the things you touched on it in the story, when Jairus comes and says, he's asked for his daughter to be healed. And then when the woman comes forward and touches him in the garment, she says, if I can just touch it, I will be healed. And then Jesus says later, daughter, you are healed. The word there, you mentioned how it touches on every aspect. The Greek word is orzo, and it's translated as healed, but also means be saved, rescued, or delivered. And so not only were they being healed, cured, they were being healed, rescued, delivered, which I think just adds to the magnitude of the story. And then when you think that both these people were unclean, the dead person's unclean, right? And the woman with the issue of blood was unclean. And yet, instead of defiling Jesus, he cleansed them and not only restored them, but then reconciled them. She couldn't worship at the temple, and now she could because she could be back around. So it operates on all those levels you're talking about. So not only is this a story about healing, it's about being saved, delivered, and rescued, which I think adds to the depth of the story.
Well, there's so many things about her part of the story we don't really know, but it does say she spent all she had. Well, for 12 years, she couldn't work. She couldn't do anything. She's probably not married at this point. So one of the things that Jesus liberated her to do is go back and make a good living and to find the circle of friends that she could no longer associate because of her uncleanliness. There's so many parts in scripture, and I think you feel the same way. I wish we had a little bit more about the aftermath of that. And I think that's what heaven's all about. We got millennia of years to go and find this woman and say, how did that work out? What happened after that encounter? I want to know more. But right, I mean, two individuals in the same day exercising great faith and seeing God come through. Peter.
Yes, I just want to ask everybody, do you trust and do you have faith of Biden on the pandemic? He said the pandemic is over. Okay. Do you trust him? Do you have faith in him? Okay. He said, so we don't have any more funding for the pandemic research. The pandemic is over. And all the science back saying there's another virus. There's a variant. There's a BA5. There's a BA275. Okay. I think for myself, I don't have faith in Biden. And this is all the human life. I think I always like to pray, let we trust on Jesus. Hopefully there's a solution. Hopefully maybe Biden get fired. Okay. So that the pandemic can be cured. Okay. But this is for all the human beings around the world. Okay. I don't trust him. I only trust Jesus. I think we should have all the church pray for this pandemic. Hopefully, Jesus will find somebody in this whole world, okay, to have a cure, to have some kind of prevention, okay. But right now, I don't have faith.
I got the feeling you're talking about testing. I got the feeling you're talking about perfect faith. And I can tell you that my faith is not perfect. And I think about Peter sinking in the water. He had faith up to a point. On the way to perfect faith, I feel like we're going to sink every now and then. And with imperfect faith, I couldn't help but think if that tightrope walker had a seatbelt on that wheelbarrow, he might have had a taker. Somebody that wasn't quite ready to do it without one.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jairus' evidence is a little bit of that vacillation. He's believing. They're interrupted. The report comes that his daughter's already dead. And so he's not really exercising faith much more. I think his head is drooping, his shoulders are down. And Jesus knows that. So he sees the imperfect faith and he says, let me give you a little bit more to trust. I will heal her. I think if we ever get to that point in whatever endeavor we're at, and we've prayed, we've settled it, just wait for Jesus to offer a little bit more encouragement. It's on the way.
People who want to be scientific have no faith. They fool themselves. Bertrand Russell set out to prove mathematics, that you can have mathematics with all of no assumptions. Gödel, the proof that proved it can't be done. There's assumptions in whatever type of belief you have, whether it's mathematics, spiritual things. There are certain things that are not proven. You have to take them off.
Well, I spend a lot of my time in the area of proof. And that's why I said when the guy asked me, can I prove heaven? I had to find out what kind of proof he would accept. And then you have to go even further. You have to say, well, do you need proof beyond a shadow of a doubt? Or can you take the same kind of proof that we use in our judicial system every day to convict criminals or let them go free? It's called legal historical proof, which is preponderance of credible evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Not beyond the shadow of a doubt, beyond reasonable doubt. What would a reasonable man say? Our common law is based on the reasonable man theory. That person doesn't exist anymore, but there was a time where if a reasonable person looked at certain evidence, what would you conclude? And so it doesn't put the burden of proof that we say beyond a shadow of a doubt. I can't prove Jesus's existence beyond a shadow of a doubt. Although I will say, historically speaking, there's more proof for his life and death and resurrection and words of teaching than any other historical figure of all history. Oh yeah, it's just clear-cut evidence that he lived. So the reasonable doubt theory is what we need to focus on.
So the illustration you used about the wheelbarrow. My faith, I think I'm planted real strongly in it. This doesn't happen so much in my older age, gray beard era, but when I was a young guy, the devil would always come by and say, you don't know what you're talking about. You weren't really sincere back then when you accepted that Jesus guy. And pretty soon you don't know. And then you hang around some good brothers and maybe get kicked back into the right way of thinking. But would you have any words of wisdom how you can crawl back into the wheelbarrow when you've been kicked out, or when you fall out, or when you crawl out?
Yeah, I think you hit on it, and that is Jesus commended childlike faith. And you mentioned that early on in life, sometimes it feels a little bit easier to believe before we get all this adult stuff in our head that causes doubt. I think that we need to find a way to return to childlike faith. And it seems to me like after we've lived a long enough period of time and we've wandered away from the wheelbarrow, we've discovered that all those other options don't really work. They don't pay out. We've tasted and seen that the other options outside of faith don't work. And so there can be a return. We can get back in the wheelbarrow. Unfortunately for us, sometimes it's after trial and error. And we found that the other things just don't satisfy like the childlike faith we had. What was childlike faith? Man, you didn't worry about stuff. You knew mom and dad would provide those 3 meals a day and place to sleep and toys under the tree. And you just made major assumptions of trust from your parents and maybe other people. We get so smart and old and informed in our adult years that we question some of that. And that's where we get into trouble. So I think you can crawl back in, but you got to go back in almost as a child. Coach?
I think it's great how this ties into what you were teaching yesterday. I think we start figuring out ways, well, that might be true, but I'm going to still go back to my old ways, and I'm still going to earn my way into heaven instead of having faith that I'm taken care of. And that's when Paul started scolding them. He said, why do you want to go back there? You know? And so I think I love the tying in of the two today.
Yeah. Yeah. Eric, I see, has raised his hand up in Michigan. Eric, what would you like to add?
Well, I've had quite a life. You know, I attended Sunday school when I was young, and I was told in Sunday school and, you know, camp and stuff that our lives were just designed from God the day we were born. And I truly believe that. My life has been turned so many directions thanks to the Lord. When I was 13, I accepted Christ. That was the greatest. But when I was in the 7th grade, I got my front teeth knocked out playing ball on the side lot. And I played the cornet, the trumpet. And I always said, Louis Armstrong, look out, here I come. Well, I got my teeth knocked out. I couldn't play the horn anymore. And that year I won the gym class championship. And it's amazing how your life changes. How I ended up in 2 wrestling Hall of Fames. God redesigned my life. Every spot in my life. When I was in the Navy, and I was supposed to get out in '64, just before Vietnam started. I asked the commanding officer, can I get off? He says, no, you're a radio man. I need you to control the planes. I need you on the ship. Jackie wrote 2 congressmen and got me out with an honorable discharge. That's God. That's divine intervention. And I don't know if I told you the story what happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I happened to be getting ready to go to Bible study, and I looked down the street and I saw this little boy, and I knew who he was. He was 2.5 years old, and I knew all dogs in the neighborhood. And I saw this 185-pound, I knew he weighed that because I know the owners, attacked this 2.5-year-old boy. Well, I got my legs in running, and I got down there, and by then the dog was biting the young boy's lips off. And I knew how strong I am, but I knew I wasn't strong enough to wail on this bull mastiff. And I prayed to God right there on the spot to give me more strength. And I beat the hell out of that dog. We saved the boy, got him in the hospital. He's okay, but he's going to suffer the rest of his life. So God has always given my strength that I needed whenever I needed it. And my life has been designed by him. I became a full-time Christian when I retired. And my obligation is to bring other people to Christ because of what he's done for me. I'm so grateful for the Lord. He's my Savior, my Emmanuel. Amen.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, he's pretty good at doing that, the on the spot Energizer Bunny kind of stuff that you got. Thank you for that story.
I want Eric on my wrestling team.
I want to be on Bill Lamb's team.
I think, yeah, he said you're on the same team. But if he ever starts recruiting again, Eric, we'll be in the list.
That's right. That man's got secrets more than I have. And I've got a lot of.
Hope this has encouraged you guys in your own faith and where you are and where you want to be. Next time you see a wheelbarrow, you have something to think about. Are you in or are you out? Let me pray for us one time before we go. Thank you, Father, that you would allow us the privilege of faith. You could have just locked us in and forced us to believe, but you invite us into a life of faith. And with that, we ask you to show your strength as you have throughout most of our life. More than the amazing Blondin, you demonstrate capabilities beyond the natural. Help us to trust in you, to not just believe and look at the data and affirm that it's true, but to fully engage, to rest in the fact that you are who you say you are. And we can continue this adventure called faith every day. May others peek in the windows of our life and see a Christian whose life and trust is in Jesus. And they see that strength, and maybe they ask us, what gives you your power? What gives you your strength? What is your remedy for life? And we can tell them the faith that we experience. Thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.